What if you woke up one morning and found someone claiming your own driveway? Not by mistake, not because they didn't know, but because they decided your property didn't matter anymore. That's exactly what happened to me. The head of our HOA, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, started parking her shiny Escalade right across my driveway. Every single day. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. But when she told me this is community space now, I realized she wasn't joking. And what happened next turned her arrogance into the most expensive parking lesson in HOA history. You ever meet someone who walks around like they own the world? That was Karen, our HOA president, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood. She had that kind of voice that made every sentence sound like an order and a smile that somehow managed to feel like an insult. At first, I didn't pay her much attention. I figured, fine, she wants to run the monthly meetings and hand out newsletters. Let her. I wasn't looking for trouble. But then one morning, I walked outside and froze. Right there, parked square in the middle of my driveway, was her bright white Escalade. I remember just standing there, staring at it. It was so bold, it didn't even feel real. I walked over and knocked on her door. She opened it like she'd been expecting me. "Morning," I said. "You parked in my driveway." She tilted her sunglasses down and said, "Oh, that's community space. Emergency access and visitor overflow. It's in the HOA guidelines." I almost laughed. I'd helped write those guidelines when the neighborhood was first being built. There was no visitor overflow anywhere. But she said it with such fake authority that I almost started second-guessing myself. When I tried to explain, she just smiled, that fake, condescending smile. "You're welcome, by the way. Keeping it in use helps maintain property value." Then she shut the door. Just like that, I stood there, stunned. My driveway, my property. And somehow she'd decided it was hers to use. The next morning, same thing. Her Escalade was back. Then it became daily. Sometimes she'd even let her family or friends park there. I'd come home from work to find random cars in my spot. Once I got blocked in so badly I couldn't even leave for my shift the next morning. The neighbors noticed. Oh, they saw. But none of them said a word. You could feel it in that quiet fear. Because everyone knew Karen had power. Not real power, but the kind that ruins your week. Surprise HOA fines, fake violations, embarrassing call-outs during meetings. Nobody wanted to be her next target. One night I came home late, exhausted, and found her SUV right there again. I honked. Nothing. Lights off. I ended up sleeping in my truck because she claimed she didn't hear it. That's when I realized. This wasn't just about parking. It was about control. She wanted to make me small, and that's when I started to get angry. A few weeks later, I came back from a work trip. The whole neighborhood felt off, quiet. People were watching me. Some wouldn't even make eye contact. And there it was again, the Escalade right in my driveway. But this time, there was a note taped to my garage door. It said, "You don't use this enough. Consider it shared space now. Deal with it." I just stood there staring at that note. You know that kind of anger that doesn't come out as yelling? The kind that just sits in your chest, heavy? That was it. That driveway wasn't just concrete to me. I built it myself years ago after losing my wife. Every inch of this property carried meaning. It was something I'd poured time, money, and love into, and now she was treating it like her personal parking garage. I wanted to explode. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath. And I remembered something my dad used to say. Don't get mad. Get even. Legally. See, I've spent most of my life working construction and farming. I know concrete. I know machinery. I know how to make things permanent. So instead of yelling at her, I smiled. If she wanted to treat my driveway like public parking, fine. I'd give her something that couldn't be moved. That night, I pulled out a sketch pad and started drawing. By sunrise, I had a plan. Elegant, quiet, and absolutely effective. The next weekend, I brought out my old tractor, some cinder blocks, rebar, and a load of soil. To anyone watching, it looked like I was building a landscaping feature, and technically I was. I called them decorative planters, beautiful, symmetrical, and completely immovable. 4 tons each, reinforced concrete bases filled with soil and flowers on top. They looked good enough to be in a magazine, but there was no way anyone was parking past them. By Sunday afternoon, they were set, perfectly aligned. Once they hardened, there was no moving them without heavy machinery. I stood back, wiped the sweat off my forehead, and smiled. For the first time in weeks, the driveway looked like mine again. The next morning, I was in the kitchen when I heard it, the sound of tires crunching against gravel, followed by a sudden stop. Then, shouting, I stepped outside. There was Karen standing in front of the planters, hands on her hips, screaming like someone had stolen her car. "What is this?" she yelled. You can't just block the driveway. That's community access. I walked over, calm as ever. Community access? I thought it was my driveway. She started pacing, shouting about bylaws and violations and safety concerns. Neighbors began peeking out from their windows. A few even stepped outside. You could see phones recording. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Then she screamed, "I'm calling the police!" "Good idea," I said. "Ask them to bring a measuring tape." "I've got my permits." 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. The officer walked around, looked at the driveway, checked my paperwork, then looked at Karen. "Ma'am," he said, "these planters are on his property." "He's not breaking any laws." She was speechless. You could almost see the power drain from her face. The officer nodded at me and said, "Have a nice day, sir." Then he drove off. Karen just stood there, red-faced, fuming, surrounded by neighbors whispering and recording. I walked back toward my house, and before closing the door, I said one thing. "Guess you'll have to park in the community lot from now on." That day, it wasn't just my driveway I reclaimed. It was my peace. But I also knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't done. People like her never walk away quietly. And what came next made the driveway drama look like child's play. They thought the fight was over the moment the planters went in. Karen didn't. If anything, that's when she doubled down, louder, nastier, more dramatic than before. She trotted out the old playbook. Fines slapped on my door, frantic emails, to the board claiming safety violations, and a tearful public monologue about how the neighborhood was being threatened. But this time, the audience wasn't politely nodding. Everyone had their phones out. Her meltdown played in real time. She paced the sidewalk, waving printed copies of bylaws like evidence, shouting about emergency access and community standards. A few neighbors tried to reason with her, but most just watched, staring at the blue-stained face of a woman who'd misread the room and the rules. Clips of her tirade spread across neighborhood chats within an hour. The tone changed from nervous compliance to open amusement. Her theatrics lost their power once they were being filmed instead of whispered about behind closed doors. When the patrol car arrived the first time, the officer did what officers do: document and de-escalate. He looked at the planters, inspected the permits taped to my window, and flipped through a few municipal codes on his tablet. He didn't write a ticket. He asked a few direct questions, then left with a polite nod. Karen's face when he walked away without action, that was the first genuine crack in her armor. She tried to weaponize process next. Formal violation. Notices appeared, typed up and stamped, claiming the planters were unauthorized obstructions. That would have been intimidating in the old days, when people paid fines to avoid headaches. But everyone had already seen her meltdown. The notices started to look like clutching at straws. Then the fire department showed up, because fire safety had been her go-to argument. 2 uniformed firefighters walked the driveway, measured the access points, and shook their heads. "These meet code," one of them said plainly. "Plenty of clearance for emergency vehicles." That line, spoken by professionals who actually dealt with threats, landed like a gavel. If safety wasn't an issue, what was left of her case? Her next move was almost comical in its extravagance. She hired a crew to remove the planters. I thought she might try to physically force the issue when the flatbed rolled up, big hydraulics ready. The crew looked the part. Hard hats, heavy equipment, the kind of people who take jobs and get paid. They circled the planters, ran the numbers, then pulled me aside. $15,000 minimum, the foreman said. And we'd need a permit for demolition, traffic control, haul-off, and a crane for the base alone. When I told him the story, the note taped to my garage, the patrol officer's visit, the fire department clearance, he sighed. "We don't want to be the ones who make this neighborhood's next viral video," he said, and walked back to his truck. They refused to touch the planters. That $15K price tag landed on Karen like a boomerang. The public ridicule intensified. People who had only ever nodded in meetings started stepping forward. Quiet admissions bubbled up in doorways and across fence lines. "She did the same to us. She once fined my mom for a mailbox decoration. She pressured me to sell." Stories that had lived in hushed tones now joined into a chorus. The neighborhood remembered, then they remembered louder. The HOA board, which had previously meekly followed her lead, suddenly found itself in a difficult position. Boards, don't like bad headlines, and they especially don't like being the butt of the group chat. Behind closed doors, the board split. Some members who had been complicit for years shifted nervously toward the side of reason. Others scrambled to salvage whatever they could. At the next formal meeting, the mood was thinly veiled fury masked as civility. Residents packed the room. Cameras filmed from the back. Karen stood up, defiantly clutching her notes, and tried to command the room as if nothing had changed. But the room had changed. Faces that once bowed now surveyed her with a new, cold appraisal. One by one, people spoke. They told the truth about fines that seemed curated to squeeze, about selective enforcement, about the small, relentless pressure that had driven neighbors to sell. It wasn't dramatic. It was painfully mundane, the kind of steady harassment that eats away at a community. As the testimony mounted, the board members who had once defended Karen found themselves flipping through minutes and memos looking for cover. There wasn't any that didn't have her fingerprints all over it. The vote wasn't theatrical, it was practical. The board removed her from her post. You could hear it in the dull click of the gavel that followed. The end of a reign built more on rumor and bluster than any legitimate mandate. As she stormed out, I heard her shout the line. That would be replayed in group chats for weeks. "I am the HOA." It sounded less like authority and more like a confession. A few days later, she put the house on the market. By then, the legal weight had shifted. The county clerk reviewed permits and found the planters were within property rights and built according to code. The police file contained the original note and the officer's observations. The fire department's clearance stood. The HOA's threats evaporated in the face of documentation and public scrutiny. When she tried to push fines through, they were rescinded. When she threatened litigation, the neighborhood pooled resources and expert witness testimony from the same contractor who'd quoted the removal fee. The narrative that had been so carefully manufactured fell apart under the simple force of facts and community memory. The fallout was messy in ways that felt cleansing. Embarrassment led to apology emails from a few board members who had turned a blind eye. A formerly silent neighbor organized a small fund to help those older residents who'd been pressured into selling in past years. New board elections brought in people who actually knew how to manage a community instead of perform control. The group chat that had once been a place for passive complaints became a hub for civic organization, neighborhood watch, community garden days, a real fund for legal counsel. And the planters? They became a strange little symbol of resilience. Kids leaned on them waiting for buses. Neighbors swapped summer annuals and admired the sturdy workmanship. People who once scowled now stopped to ask what the flowers were this year. A few joked that the planters had increased curb appeal, and property values did tick up, in part because the tension that had kept buyers away eased. The driveway reclaimed its ordinary, quiet life, the best revenge being how unremarkable it became. Sitting on my porch one evening, watching someone tuck a bouquet into one of those concrete bowls, I thought about what it takes to push back. It isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's paperwork, patience, a steady hand, and the willingness to let others see the truth. Sometimes it's literally concrete. So I'll leave you with this. If someone tried to claim the space you built, the place that carries your memories and your work, would you throw up your hands and walk away, or would you defend it? Would you fight back, or would you fold?